Clementine looked at herself in the mirror. It was nice to be in some new clothes and have the chance to bath, and even though the water was cold, she longed for days of being back at the cabin. Pete had managed to set the group up with warm water. It saddened her to think of all the good people she had lost since then. First Connie, then Pete, Nick, Vince, even Carlos. She left the bathroom and noticed her mother standing outside the door. "You look very pretty, sweetie," Rebecca said. "Thanks, Mommy," Clementine responded. "I'm guessing you're going for a bath next." "Yeah, be good and make sure to help Daddy with your baby sister," Rebecca said. "Okay, I will," Clementine said. "That's my girl," Rebecca said, before she entered the bathroom. Clementine went downstairs and saw her baby sister, as it appeared that she was wandering towards the door. "Where are you going?" Clementine asked, as she approached the toddler. She picked up Genevieve before she reached the door. Clementine looked back at her adoptive father and saw him sleeping on the ground. It appeared he fell asleep while looking after Genevieve. It made sense, considering he had looking after the toddler most of the day. Clementine looked at Genevieve and said, "So where are you going? You should actually stay close to your mommy and daddy." Genevieve pointed out the door. "Outside?" Clementine asked. The toddler nodded. "Why do you want to go outside?" Clementine asked. "Not safe," Genevieve said. Clementine was confused by this. Why would the toddler think that she wasn't safe in a walled community? Then she realized she probably only had been in one walled community, which was Carver's. She was used to life on the run. "It's okay, Genevieve. It's not a bad place," Clementine said. "There's no mean man here, just friends." The toddler didn't seem convinced. She kept eyeing the door. Clementine figured that she would relax eventually. "Let's go play blocks. You like to play with blocks, don't you?" Genevieve nodded. "All right," Clementine said. She then took her baby sister over to the toy blocks and played with her for a while. However, no matter how many times she played with her, Clementine and Genevieve would keep looking at the door. Clementine wasn't so sure why she kept doing this. "She doesn't feel safe, huh?" Clementine heard her friend say. She looked over to Sarah, who was watching Genevieve. Typically, she would smile at Genevieve, but not now. It looked like she wasn't dazed anymore. She wore a purple hooded sweatshirt with a green shirt underneath, a demi-skirt, black tights, and black boots, almost as she always wore. "Sarah, you okay?" Clementine asked. She got up and approached her friend. Sarah shook her head and she said, "Genevieve will never feel safe again. I took him away from her." Tears started to form in her eyes as her voice started to crack. "No, Sarah, you're blaming yourself for what happened. It isn't your fault," Clementine said. "You're wrong, Clem. It's always my fault," Sarah said. "First my mom, then my dad, and now Zeke. They all died because of me. Because I'm useless." "Don't say that," Clementine said. "Sarah, I've always been where you're at. It's the worst feeling in the world. But the last thing you should ever do is blame yourself. I should know. I blame myself for anyone who's died a long time. It just doesn't work." Sarah shook her head and she said, "You're just a kid, Clem. You don't understand." She walked away from Clementine. "I could have done more. I should have never talked bad about my dad. I should have told him I loved him. And Zeke." She stood in front of the door to go outside. "There was so much I could have done for him. I let him die." Before Clementine could say another word, Sarah opened the door and left the house. She was brought out of her daze by Genevieve crying. She walked over to the toddler and picked her up. She must have understood what Sarah was talking about. Clementine bobbed the toddler in her arms to calm her down. "Shh, it's okay," Clementine said. There was nothing Clementine could do to soothe the daughter. A few minutes passed before her father woke up. "What? What's wrong? Is Genevieve hurt?" Alvin asked. Clementine looked at her adoptive father and she said, "Sarah's talked about Zeke." Alvin's eyes widened and said, "Oh, here, I could take her." He had his arms stretched out. Clementine gave him to the whimpering toddler. "Shh, it's okay, baby. Everything's all right," Alvin said as he cradled the small toddler in his arms. And seconds later, she had calmed down and she was asleep. "You're really good at it," Clementine said. "Just comes with experience," Alvin said. "By the way, you could have woken me up. You didn't have to look after Genevieve by yourself." Clementine shrugged. "She's cute and I wanted to play with her," Clementine said. Alvin chuckled and he said, "That's fine, honey. but you don't have to console her by yourself when she's crying. Okay, Clementine said with a frown. Alvin noticed this and said, I think you did a very good job of being a big sister. Thanks, Clementine said, with a small smile formed on her face. She got up and looked over at the front door that Sarah used to leave. Did Sarah leave? Alvin asked. Yeah, Clementine said. She'll talk to us when she's ready, Alvin said. We just gotta be patient till then. Clementine nodded. She wondered when the time would come. She missed her best friend. Sarah continued to walk down the sidewalk to the small community. Clementine's words kept echoing through her mind as she saw that night. That night she lost her father and her boyfriend. Clementine was wrong. She knew that something was wrong, and she was constantly thinking about what she could have done to save them, or have been dying with them. She shuddered at the thought of dying, but if she died in that herd, she would see her mom, her dad, and her boyfriend again. She'd get a chance to see Decker for the first time. It would be nice to see him considering how much Zeke talked about him. Hey, watch out! A boy's voice was heard. Before she could turn her head, she was hit in the head with a ball. The ball hit her so hard she lost her balance and fell to the ground. Ow, Sarah muttered. She got up and was met by a boy. He appeared to be the same age as her. He wore an orange sweatshirt with a black shirt underneath, blue jeans, and black boots. Sorry about that, the boy said. He picked up the ball that hit her. It was a basketball. Austin threw up a brick. Sarah was confused by what he said and gave him a questioning look. You don't know what a brick is? The boy asked. No, I think sports are stupid, Sarah muttered. Geez, okay, the boy said with his arms up in surrender. Sarah's face softened and said, I'm sorry, I've just had a couple bad days. It's cool, the boy said. Let me guess, you lost someone close to you? She shook her head and said, I lost 2 people who were close, and it's my fault. Well, that sucks, the boy said. There was a long pause before one of the boys spoke. Hey, Jed, pass the damn ball. The boy looked back at one of the boys and said, All right, here, you moron. He then tossed the ball to the boy. He looked back at Sarah and said, Sorry about them. We just don't get a lot of downtime in the community, so we usually make the most of it. Your name's Jed? Sarah asked. Yep, the one and only, Jed said. So what's your name? Sarah, Sarah said. Sarah, nice name. So tell me, Sarah, why don't you like sports? I guess you weren't too good at them? Jed asked. I usually get bullied by jocks, Sarah said. Oh, that sucks, Jed said. I guess I could see why you're not a fan of sports. Uh-huh, Sarah said. Anyway, it's nice to meet you. She proceeded to walk away, but Jed proceeded to catch up to her and walk with her. Hey, look, I know you probably want to be alone and all, but, Jed said. Then why don't you just leave me alone? Sarah inquired. Jed scoffed and said, Because I know how to make you feel better. Sarah looked at him with a questioning glare. How? She asked. Jed smiled and said, Meet me at my house after dinner. My house number is 2501. Sarah contemplated on what she said before shaking her head in agreement. She had no idea what could consider her to make her feel better. Cool, and by the way, you might want to go find your group. We're all gonna have dinner soon, Jed said. Okay, thanks, Sarah said. No prob, Jed said as he walked away. She started to walk back to her house where her group was in. She kept contemplating on what Jed told her. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but at this point she would be willing to do almost anything to dull the plan. Julie had returned to tell the group that it was time for dinner, and they had to wait till Luke returned with Sarah. In the meantime, Gil, Randy, and Patricia arrived at the house. Clementine was playing cards with Becca, Russell, and Gil as they waited. It seemed that Becca had calmed down since Clementine had last spoken to her. Do you think Sarah's okay? Gil asked. I don't think so, Clementine said, and I don't think there's anything I could say or do to change that. Sarah just needs time. Don't worry, Russell said. There was a long pause. It was Becca's turn. She seemed to be spacing out. Hey, Beck, your turn, Russell said. Sorry, what'd you say? Becca asked. I said it was your turn, Russell said. Becca packed up the card and laid it down in the pile. It was as if she wasn't there either. Clementine was wondering if she was going to go through the same thing as Sarah. But why? She didn't think that she and Zeke were friends. and she knew that Becca and Carlos didn't like each other. "Is everything okay, Becca?" Clementine asked. She wasn't very close to Becca, but she didn't mean that she didn't care about her. Becca looked up and said, "I wish." "Do you miss Zeke?" Clementine asked. "Clem, let her be," Russell said. "No, it's okay, Russ. I think I'm ready to talk about it," Becca said. She placed her cards down and said, "I miss Vince, you know. Shell and Vince were actually dating. I thought it'd be really cool to have a brother-in-law like him. And then he died and now I feel like shit. Vince was sometimes like a big brother to me." "Oh, I'm so sorry," Clementine said. Vince was a good friend. He had tried to stop Carver from hurting her, and it seemed like always at the group's best interest in mind. "Yeah," Becca said. Russell placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Typically, Becca would shrug him off, but she seemed to accept it. Clementine drew a card. She paused when she heard footsteps approaching the door they were in. It was Wyatt and Eddie. "Hey kids, time to go," Eddie said. "We are very late." They got up and walked over to the two adults. "I'm just looking after them, Russ. Let's just get going," Wyatt said. They proceeded to left the house. Clementine noticed the other adults were ahead of them and they were approaching the large factory building from before. "The cafeteria is here? You do realize the FDA would have a field day with this, right?" Wyatt joked. "Hey, we've eaten worse places. Remember that time in Seattle?" Eddie asked. "Yeah, thanks. I think I just threw up a little in my mouth from that memory itself," Wyatt said. The two proceeded to chuckle. "So, what are we having tonight?" Russell asked. "I don't know. It's usually a surprise. Oh, and by the way, there's something we need to do before we eat." "There's someone you need to meet," Eddie said. He then looked at Wyatt, who mentioned the last part. "Who?" Wyatt asked. "The guy that chased us," Eddie said. Wyatt's eyes widened and exclaimed, "No, no, 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 hell no! What the fuck, Eddie? The psycho's here! He nearly killed us!" Wyatt had stopped and looking around, as if he was expecting to be attacked. They all stopped and waited for the two adults. "Why, man, relax. He's not the bad once you get to know him," Eddie said. "Besides, I did shoot his friend, so—" "He tried to kill us," Wyatt said. "Look, man, all I'm asking is you meet him and talk it out," Eddie said. "Oddly enough, I'm actually friends with him now." "That's crazy. We've done some crazy shit. But this is going too far. He will kill us," Wyatt said. "He's not like that anymore. He's changed, man," Eddie said. "He usually goes out to scavenge for the community, so you won't even see him that much." Several seconds had passed, and Clementine couldn't help but grasp at her stomach as it growled. She was starving. She wondered what should just leave Wyatt with Eddie, but she was too nervous. She didn't feel safe on her own. Finally, Wyatt huffed and said, "Fine, against my better judgment. I will go along with this train wreck of a plan. But I promise you, if he kills me, I'm going to haunt your ass for the rest of your life." "I wouldn't be expecting any less," Eddie said with a smirk. "Alright, let's just get this over with," Wyatt muttered. "Follow me to your demise," Eddie joked. He then continued to walk towards the factory. "I'm dead serious about haunting you for the rest of your life if this guy kills me," Wyatt said as he followed Eddie. The rest of the small group followed. Gil chuckled. "Is Wyatt always like this?" Gil asked. Clementine shrugged and she said, "I don't know. I haven't hanged out with him much." "He does have a good sense of humor," Russell said. "He's more sarcastic since he's around Eddie. But if I remember correctly, Wyatt said that he and Eddie would have been best friends since they were children." "Whoa," Gil said. He was impressed that Wyatt and Eddie had been friends for so long. "So what exactly happened in Seattle?" Russell scoffed and he said, "You don't want to know, especially when we're about to eat." "Fair enough," Gil said. Clementine looked around the area. She had to admit that it almost looked like a real cafeteria. The factory smelled different now. The smell earlier had been replaced by the sweet aroma of food. She saw many adults at the tables, and she and her group were the last one to come and get something to eat. Everyone else was either eating or talking. It reminded her so much of the ski lodge, and it was awful that the ski lodge didn't work. "There he is," Eddie said. He handed them over to a man who had his back turned to them. He seemed to be eating something from a bowl. He wore a blue hat, black leather jacket, with a tan hooded sweatshirt underneath. a pair of blue jeans, and a pair of gray boots. He looked to be in his early 40s. "Hey, I was wondering if you would make it back," Eddie said to the man. The man turned to the group. He got out of his seat, which revealed a small girl next to him. Clementine figured that she could have been 9. She had long brown hair and wore a yellow hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and white shoes. "Stoner, I see you've been keeping yourself lazy," the man teased. "Nate!" Russell exclaimed. The man looked over to Russell. His eyes widened for a second before clearing his throat. "Russ, long time no see," the man said. "The fuck you doing here?" Russell exclaimed. Clementine looked around the room and noticed that everyone had gone quiet and were watching them. "Easy, Russ," the man named Nate said. "Wait, this guy is Nate? The same guy that shot the old couple?" Wyatt asked. Russell nodded. He kept reaching for his handgun, which wasn't there. He must have been not thinking straight. After all their weapons had been confiscated by the guards when they entered the community.